and tangential. The terms I choose to use when classifying the different kinds of characters within the repertoire of my life and art reveal the criteria I use to divide them into groups. This can be observed in other classification systems too. Class, in the sociological sense of working class or upper class, divides a population into groups based on the kind of economic labor they perform or do not perform. Here, categories of economic labor become the grouping criteria. In the Linnaean biological classification system, species are grouped according to species and genera. Thus we, sapiens, form part of the genus Homo and are designated as Homo sapiens. Here, species classification is based on genetic proximity, which can sometimes, but not always, be observed by the naked eye through similar phenotypic characteristics, which is what early biologists like Carl Linnaeus did. Of course, the categorization of things according to their perceived proximity is inherently political and, when carried out by those in power, potentially violent, as pointed out by Ros Gray and Sheila Sheikh in their critique of colonial legacies in the history of botany. Classification always trades in the complexity of the object of study for the convenience of studying it. This is often brought to bear when we come up against the grey areas. There are always grey areas between class groupings in sociology, biology, and character. Individuals can equally belong in one grouping as well as another. This was something that Charles Darwin already pointed out in The Origin of Species, and he wrote, quote, "Certainly, no clear line of demarcation has yet been drawn between species and subspecies. These differences blend into each other in an insensible series." End quote. The grey areas reveal that our classification system is not the whole story, and remind us that although some things are similar to each other in some ways, they can be far apart in others, and that nobody designed society, biology, or character by first creating boxes into which to group them. The boxes came later as our means of managing complexity. In this, classification systems have something in common with scientific models. Both are powerful epistemological tools, but they can only highlight one way of looking at something at a time, privileging one criterion over another. Further, the criteria we use to classify a population is always political in that it stratifies its members in one way, when it could have stratified them in another. How we classify a population, then, often comes to have consequences for its members. As mentioned previously, it seemed necessary at times to group my characters in some way because they seemed different in kind. However, I have struggled to find the right terminology because I did not know what criteria to use. Very early in the research, I thought that the object of my study was fictional characters. I did not see myself as a character. Rather, I thought I was a person, and that I was making up characters that approximated persons. I was interested in researching how closely this approximation could be made. At this stage, we can see that a distinction was being made between character and person, where person was elevated above character in that a character could only ever approximate the person. Soon I discovered that almost everything I did, in life as well as art, seemed to be expressed by one character or another, depending on the situation. Frame-switching studies explained the multiplicity and changeability of character in daily life based on the fact that a human being is expected to exhibit a continuous personality to a given social group, or audience, to use Goffman's term. Since the human being must encounter several different audiences, and since the character they express in the presence of these audiences may be different, multiple characters play a role in the everyday life of a human being. Therefore, I discarded the term person entirely for the time being and focused only on character, defined as a pattern of self-consistent behavior, and the human being, defined as the apparatus which plays out character. It was still clear at this point, however, that although characters populated both my art practice and my everyday self-presentation, there was something distinctly different about the group of characters I performed in life and the group of characters I performed in art. That is why I began to refer to the character or characters exhibited in my everyday self-presentation as the habitual character or habitual characters, since they were the ones I was more practiced at expressing and which I expressed most of the time. The characters which I used to call fictional in my artistic practice began to seem fictional only insofar as I did not normally express them. I could easily imagine another life where I really did act and speak like one of the characters in my performances, and then that character would no longer be fictional. As a result, I turned to using the terms habitual character and newly adopted character, whereby the classification criterion is the frequency with which I adopt a given character. As discussed in the previous section, I arrived at the present stage of the research when I, in habitual character, conversed with myself in a newly adopted character. The slight tension I experienced when faced with addressing a newly adopted character from the position of my habitual character attested to a certain hierarchical divide between the two. The newly adopted character herself then provided a new way of classifying our differences, the dominant character and subordinate characters. Although similar to the previous terms, habitual and newly adopted, in that they refer to the degree to which a given character dominates expression time, the terms are charged with the unequal status that such a binary implies. Should I pity her, I wondered? Is it crazy to pity a character that I've pretty much just made up? It would be like pitying a gene that did not get to be expressed. Sure, the organism overall would be a different one had the gene had a chance to express itself, and we can mourn the organism that would have been, but there is no escaping the fact that when one gene is expressed, another is not. Likewise, when one character is being expressed, another is not. But if I do not pity the subordinate character for barely ever getting to make an appearance, then I should also not mourn the day when my present habitual character gets exchanged for another. Yet I do mourn the habitual characters I discard over time. I feel their loss keenly whenever I pick up one of my diaries. From fictional character and person over habitual and newly adopted to dominant and subordinate, these different approaches to classifying character in life and in art each reveal a particular dividing bias. The first has to do with the character's reality status. Are they real or imaginary? The second with the frequency with which the human being adopts the character, and the third with the character's power status. I was now in a position to decide in what way differentiating groups of character might be relevant to this research, what kind of classification system may be most useful. To stage the dominant-subordinate binary for further consideration, I devised another experiment in which I would inhabit a subordinate character so as to give it adequate soul time to voice its concerns. I applied the same self-estrangement approach as I normally would in my performance practice, only instead of speaking to camera, I wrote a letter addressed to the dominant character. Letter to the dominant character. Where do I even begin? You have a beginning, a middle, an end, You even have an afterlife called a legacy. I have no such beginning from which to hail. I land into this world fully formed, yet inexperienced. I land into it like a foal already running and talking, animated with the appearance of having a history. But my history is only one brief scion to your great trunk, a slither of what you could have been. I am the opportunity foregone. You are the survivor who lives to tell the tale. I struggle a little with accepting the charity of your pen. It was your idea, after all, to write this letter. I can only speak upon your solicitation. But my mouth is a dam, and so precious is the moment my voice erupts, that I comply and perform the difference you wish here to conjure. What did you hope I would say? Did you hope I could free you from your own dominance, or reward your oppressor's enlightenment with the promise of a character nirvana into which you could recede, turn from a dominator to a mere drop in the ocean of personality? Tough luck, you stumbled on a cynical one. Better luck getting someone else to write your damn letter next time. When I went back into habitual character and read over the letter I received, I was bemused with the outcome, proud of the character's response, but also skeptical regarding this claim about my dominance and its associated privileges. In a certain sense, the author of the letter is right to point out that I have a beginning, middle, and end, as well as a legacy. Although the dominant character is not everlasting and is subject to change over the lifetime of a human being, it becomes part of the socially accepted narrative of the person in a way that the author of the letter does not. I, whenever I am discarded and replaced by another habitual character, will still form one of the voices in the series of diaries that chronicle my life, like one descendant in a lineage of Katerinas. The author of the letter will not. They are, as they say, a scion to the trunk that is this socially accepted lineage of Katerinas, a branch that abruptly ends before having a chance to form a lineage of its own. I dominate in the sense that I am here most of the time, and when I am seen by friends and family, they will recognize me, not the author of this letter. But the so-called subordinate character that authored the letter has failed to recognize their own privileges and my burdens. I am under oath to represent the human being known as Katerina. I must uphold her reputation in the eyes of others, and see to it that I act consistently under each audience's gaze. Through my own performance, I must continually work hard to maintain the definition of each social situation, the laboriousness of which is covered in detail by Goffman. Maintaining consistency in the impressions Katerina makes on others can be a tiring business. It is up to me to suppress deviation from my own expression as dominant character, because it is I who will carry the blame if I do not. I who will cause embarrassment and conflict and suffer the social punishment if I do not maintain Katerina's social consistency. I may dominate in expression time, but I bear the social responsibility carried by Katerina. This gave rise to yet another way of classifying character within the repertoire of my life and art. Some characters are tethered to the social milieu, as am I. And some characters, like the ones that crop up in my practice, are tangential. Tethered characters are bound to and determined by a constant cost-gain calculus that is being carried out in each social interaction. A tangential character, on the other hand, is perhaps able to fully be itself in a way that the tethered character cannot. Fleeting, transitory, the tangential character lives out a short but powerful life. It can express itself in ways that are not restricted by the cost-gain dynamics of the social milieu, but for the same reason, these characters are considered not really to be Katerina. Over the other classification approaches, tethered and tangential is preferred as it defines character by the degree to which it is bound to the social milieu. This way of understanding the differences between characters in life and in art, as based upon their role in relation to social life, will bring into relief some of the ways in which humanity has, for the most part unconsciously, managed human character. This will form the central theme of Chapter 6, where we will also explore how experiments with tangential characters might inform the management of tethered characters within the social milieu.